Welcome to Lyra Echo Stories, where every story echoes emotions, memories, and hidden truths. Step in and feel the echo of every tale.
$135,000. That's what my parents spent on my sister's wedding. I know the exact number because I've calculated it more times than any reasonable person should. The venue was 42,000. The dress was 11, the flowers were 9, the caterer was 14, the band was 8, the photographer was 6, the cake was 4, and the rest vanished into monogrammed napkins, custom cocktail stirrers, and a chocolate fountain that 3 people used. My back surgery would have cost $15,000 out of pocket. My mother said no to 15 and yes to 135, and she did it in the same season, from the same checking account, sitting at the same kitchen table where my grandmother once taught me how to use a pocket calculator. Grandma Dorothy had a saying. She'd set me on her knee, put that little Texas Instruments in my hands, and say, "Numbers don't lie, Lauren. People do. But numbers? Never." She was right about the numbers. She was wrong about one thing: she didn't think the people she loved would need to. I should tell you about that kitchen table, because it matters. It was oak, scratched from 30 years of homework and Thanksgiving turkeys and my grandmother's elbows. We lived in Overland Park, Kansas, the kind of suburb where the lawns looked identical and the problems hid behind garage doors. My parents' house sat on a cul-de-sac on Elm Ridge Drive. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths. A mortgage my father refinanced twice. Dorothy, my grandmother on my mother's side, lived 11 minutes away in a smaller house with better furniture. She smelled like Pond's cold cream and black coffee, and she kept butterscotch in a crystal dish by the front door. Every Saturday morning she'd pick me up and we'd sit at her kitchen table and she'd teach me things my parents never thought to. How to balance a checkbook, how to read a receipt, how to count change without looking at your hands. "If a boy ever tells you he loves you," she said once, tapping the calculator with her index finger, "ask him to show you his bank statement. Love is math, baby. It either adds up or it doesn't." I was 10. I didn't know what a bank statement was. But I laughed because she laughed. And her laugh was the kind that made the butterscotch dish rattle. She gave me that calculator the last time I saw her, wrote a note on a piece of masking tape and stuck it inside the battery cover. "For my Lauren, count everything. Trust the math." I didn't know she was sick. Nobody told me she was sick, because I was 10 and the adults had decided I wasn't old enough for the truth. That was the first time my family decided what I was old enough for. It would not be the last. Dorothy left 2 529 education savings plans, one for me and one for my sister Brittany. My mother mentioned it once, at the funeral, the way you mention a parking validation. Matter of fact, already moving past it. Grandma took care of everything. I nodded. I was 10. I trusted the adults. On paper, I was the golden child, straight A's, soccer captain 2 years running, National Honor Society. My mother introduced me to her book club friends like a mutual fund that was outperforming expectations. "My Lauren is going to be a doctor." She said it the way you announce a stock pick you're certain about. I never asked if I wanted to be a doctor. It was already in the portfolio. Brittany was 2 years older, pretty in the way that made cashiers give her free samples, and not particularly interested in school. My mother described this with surgical precision. "Brittany is different. She needs more support." What that meant, translated from my mother's dialect of love as accounting, was that Brittany's column required more investment because the projected returns were less certain. I was low maintenance. I was the asset that managed itself. I did not know, at 10 or 14 or 17, that being low maintenance was not a compliment. It was a budget decision. I graduated from Shawnee Mission East High School on a Thursday in May, 18th in my class, with a plan. Pre-med at the University of Kansas, then medical school, then a residency, then the life my mother had been advertising to her book club for 6 years. I had the grades, the test scores, the extracurriculars. On paper, every number pointed up. The accident happened 4 days later. I was driving to Target to buy plastic cups for my graduation party. A man named Dale Worcester ran a red light on 75th Street in a Chevy Silverado at 3:15 in the afternoon. His blood alcohol was .19. The speed limit was 35. He was doing 52. I know these numbers because I requested the police report 3 years later when I was learning how to audit insurance claims, and by then reading accident reports was just another Tuesday. The truck hit the driver's side. My car spun twice and stopped against a fire hydrant. The airbag deployed. My seatbelt held. But something in my lower back did not hold. The L4 and L5 vertebrae compressed. The disc between them ruptured, and a piece of it pressed against the nerve bundle that controlled my left leg. I don't remember the ambulance. I remember the fluorescent lights in the hallway at Overland Park Regional, and I remember the orthopedic surgeon, a woman with short gray hair and reading glasses on a chain, standing beside my bed with an image of my spine on a tablet. "You'll need a spinal fusion," she said. L4, L5. The sooner the better. The longer we wait, the more nerve damage accumulates. "How much?" I asked. She paused the way medical professionals pause when the answer involves money. "The procedure runs 50 to 80,000. With your parents' insurance, your out-of-pocket would be roughly 15 to 20,000. $15,000. I lay there doing the math on the ceiling tiles. My parents had savings. My father worked in procurement for a regional grocery chain. My mother was an office manager at a dental practice. They weren't rich, but they weren't broke. They had a 3-bedroom house on a cul-de-sac and a daughter who'd just been accepted to KU with a partial merit scholarship. 15,000. They had it. I was sure of it. I was right about one thing. My parents had the money. I was wrong about what they planned to do with it. I called my mother from the hospital bed on a Sunday morning. The phone rang 4 times, which meant she was debating whether to pick up, because Nancy Clark always answered by the second ring when she wanted to talk and let it go to 5 when she didn't. "Hi, honey, how are you feeling?" "Mom, I talked to the surgeon. The fusion, the out-of-pocket is going to be around 15,000, maybe 20, depending on the facility fee. I can cover some of it with savings from my summer job, but I need help with the rest." 4 seconds of silence. I counted, because even then I counted things. "Honey," she stretched the word like taffy, "your sister's wedding is in May. We've already put deposits down on the venue and the caterer, and you know how these things work. Once you commit, you're locked in. We just can't spare anything right now." From somewhere behind her, the living room, maybe I heard Brittany laughing. Light and easy, the way you laugh when nothing in your body is broken. "Mom, I can't feel my left leg sometimes. The doctor said the longer we wait." "You're young. You're strong. You'll manage." 3 words. Exposed, clear, no room for interpretation, like a claim denial stamped in red ink. "Your request has been reviewed and does not meet the criteria for coverage at this time." I said, "Okay." I said it the way I later learned to say it to insurance companies when they denied a claim I knew was valid, quiet, taking notes, already planning the appeal. "Except there was no appeal process for your mother choosing a chocolate fountain over your spine. The wedding was May 14th. I know because the save-the-date magnet stayed on my parents' refrigerator for 3 years afterward, a glossy photo of Brittany and Brandon in a field of wildflowers with the date in gold cursive. Brittany had always said she wanted to be married before 21. She was 20. Brandon Holloway was 22, a junior sales associate at a car dealership in Lenexa, with good teeth and a talent for saying the right thing at the wrong time. On paper, he was charming. On the spreadsheet, he was a liability with a credit score my grandmother would have called optimistic. The wedding was at Indian Hills Country Club, 200 guests, a string quartet for the ceremony, a 7-piece band for the reception, 3 signature cocktails, one of which was called the Brittany, which was pink and tasted like regret, though I might be projecting. I was there. I came because my mother said, "It would mean the world to your sister," and because I had not yet learned that it would mean the world was my mother's currency for things that would cost me and benefit someone else. I came with a walker, brushed aluminum, the kind with tennis balls on the feet, because the hospital version was $40 a day to rent, and I'd done the math. I wore a navy blue dress I'd ordered online for $37, because bending to try on clothes in a fitting room was not something my body did anymore. I sat at table 14, the back corner, near the kitchen doors, between a couple I didn't recognize and an elderly aunt who spent the entire reception telling me about her hip replacement. I sat there and I counted. 42,000 for the venue. I'd heard my mother say it on the phone to her sister, pride humming underneath the number like a bass note. 11,000 for the dress Brittany had tried on 9 before choosing the one that made her feel like a princess, which was my mother's phrase, delivered with the satisfaction of someone who had personally produced the princess. 9,000 for the flowers. 8 for the band. 6 for the photographer who kept asking me to move my walker out of the background. 4 for the cake, 4 tiers. Fondant, sugar peonies that took 2 days to make and 30 minutes to eat. And the chocolate fountain? $9,000. 3 people used it. I watched from table 14 and I calculated the per-use cost at $3,000 per person. If you factored in the white chocolate option that nobody touched, the number got worse, $135,000, and my mother stood at the microphone in a lavender dress and said, "I am so proud of my girls. Brittany, you deserve every beautiful thing in this room." Then she looked at me, table 14, Walker, navy dress, $37, and added, "And Lauren, honey, you look so strong tonight." Strong. She said it like a toast, but it landed like an invoice. "We have reviewed your account and determined that your strength is sufficient. No additional support will be provided." My father stood behind her holding a glass of champagne. He did not speak. He looked at me once, the way you look at a check you know you should have written but didn't, and then he looked somewhere else. 5 months after the wedding, Medicaid approved my surgery. 5 months of paperwork, phone calls, waiting rooms, and a caseworker named Denise, who processed my application with the efficiency of someone who did 12 of these a day. The surgery was performed at the University of Kansas Medical Center, a teaching hospital, which meant a resident assisted, which meant the procedure took 40 minutes longer than it should have. The fusion was successful. The recovery was not fast, because 5 months of delay meant 5 months of additional nerve damage, which meant 6 months of physical therapy instead of 3. I lay in the recovery room afterward. No flowers on the side table, no balloon, no mother in the chair by the window. Nancy was in Overland Park, watching Brittany's house, while Brittany and Brandon honeymooned in Cancun, a trip that cost $4,600, because at that point I had started tracking the numbers the way some people track a grudge, automatically and without deciding to. A nurse came in to check my vitals. Short woman, red hair, clipboard. "Feeling okay? Is someone coming to pick you up?" I looked at the empty chair, the blank side table, the hallway where nobody was walking toward my room. "I'll manage," I said. It was the first time I used those words. They came out smooth. No crack in the voice, no hesitation. Like I'd been rehearsing them, I hadn't. But my mother had written the script, and I had memorized it the way daughters memorize the things that wound them completely, permanently, without trying. Have you ever watched someone hand everything to the person standing next to you and then turn to you and call you strong? Have you ever smiled at a wedding while your own body was falling apart, adding up the numbers in your head because the math was the only thing that still made sense? If you have, you already know what I did next. I left. Not dramatically. Not at midnight with a suitcase and a speech. I left the way water leaves a cracked glass slowly. Then, all at once. Denver was not a plan. Denver was a pin on a map that I stuck with my eyes closed because I needed a city far enough from Overland Park that I wouldn't accidentally run into my mother at a Target. 1,400 miles. I calculated the gas cost $412, including one overnight at a Motel 6 Inches Burlington, Colorado, where the sheets smelled like bleach, and the ice machine hummed all night like it was trying to tell me something. I arrived with $1,200, one suitcase, and my grandmother's calculator. The suitcase had clothes. The calculator had a dead woman's handwriting inside it. I wasn't sure which one I needed more. My first apartment was a studio on East 13th Avenue in Capitol Hill. $850 a month, utilities not included, one window facing east. The carpet was the color of oatmeal that had given up on itself. The kitchen was 4 feet of counter, a 2-burner stove, and a refrigerator that ran so loud I named it Gerald because it sounded like a man with opinions. But the window faced east, and in the mornings when the sun came through, it turned the dust in the air into something that looked almost intentional, like the room was trying. I did physical therapy on that carpet every morning at 5:30. The exercises were simple: bridges, bird dogs, pelvic tilts, dead bugs, names that sounded absurd for movements that made me want to scream. The fusion had stabilized the vertebrae, but 5 months of delay had left nerve damage that the surgeon described as manageable with consistent rehabilitation, which is medical language for this is going to hurt for a long time, and we'd rather not say that out loud. I managed. That word again. The job came 3 weeks after I arrived. Claims processor at Rocky Mountain Health Plans, an insurance company headquartered in Grand Junction with a satellite office in Denver. $34,000 a year. My desk was in a cubicle near the bathroom. My job was to read medical claims hundreds a day and determine whether the codes matched the procedures, whether the procedures matched the diagnoses, and whether any of it added up. It turns out I was very good at making things add up. I started reading other people's medical bills the way some people read novels. Every claim was a story. Someone got sick, someone got treated, someone got charged, and someone, an insurance company, a patient, a family got the bill. The ones that kept me up at night were the denials. A 17-year-old girl in Pueblo whose spinal surgery was denied because the pre-authorization was filed 2 days late. A man in Aurora whose physical therapy was cut off at session 12 when his doctor recommended 24. I read those claims and I saw my own file, and every one of them the patient who needed something, the system that said no, and the silence where help should have been. I filed those claims accurately. I flagged the errors. And I started keeping a notebook, not because anyone asked me to, but because the numbers were telling stories that nobody was listening to. Marcus Webb joined the company 8 months after I did. Data analyst, tall, black, wore the same 3 ties in rotation, and talked about spreadsheets the way other men talked about football, with passion, conviction, and the unshakable belief that everyone else was wrong. His first words to me were at the coffee machine. "You're the one who caught the $340,000 billing error in the orthopedic claims last month. It was actually $341,000, they rounded down." He stared at me for 2 seconds. Then he grinned. "I'm Marcus. I think we're going to be friends." He was right. We ate lunch together every day, not because we were close, but because we were both people who preferred numbers to small talk, and silence between us was comfortable in a way that silence between me and most people was not. One afternoon, the 5th time he found me eating alone at my desk, he leaned against my cubicle wall and said, "You eat alone like it's a company policy. Is there a form I should fill out to join you?" I almost smiled. Almost. Marcus had a way of finding the one loose thread in your composure and pulling it gently, the way you test whether a button is about to fall off. 3 years after I left Kansas, my phone rang at 2 in the morning. The caller ID said Clark home. I sat up in bed. My back protested. It always protested at 2 a.m., the muscles tightening like they were bracing for something, and I answered. Silence. 10 seconds of it, I counted. Then my father's voice, lower than I remembered, rougher, like he'd been awake for hours deciding whether to dial. "Your grandmother would have been proud of you." He hung up. I sat there holding the phone. The screen went dark. Gerald the refrigerator hummed. I reached for Dorothy's calculator on the nightstand. I kept it there, the way some people keep a glass of water or a Bible, and pressed a key. Then another, not calculating anything, just listening to the click. Click, click, the sound of something still working. He never called again. I never called back. On paper, nothing happened that night. In practice, it was the closest my father ever came to an apology, and we both knew it wasn't enough, and we both let it be what it was. The years moved the way years do when you're building something from the floor, up slow when you're inside them, fast when you look back. Year 2, I caught a pattern of duplicate billing at a hospital network that saved the company $340,000, and they promoted me to senior adjuster. Year 4, a consulting firm in Lodo offered me twice my salary to audit their healthcare clients, and I said yes before they finished the sentence. Year 6, I sat in a meeting where I knew more about medical claims processing than anyone else at the table, including the hospital's CFO, and I thought, I can do this for someone else, or I can do this for myself. I filed the LLC paperwork on a Thursday. Clark Healthcare Consulting. $400 in filing fees. I remember the exact amount because I remember the exact amount of everything: the price of my apartment, the cost of my surgery, the number of days since I'd last spoken to my mother. Some people journal. I invoice. On paper, I was a success story. Bootstrapped. Self-made. The kind of woman magazine articles write about with words like resilient and driven. In person, I was a woman who ate dinner alone 6 nights a week and called it efficiency. By year 8, my firm had 4 employees, a corner office on Wazee Street with a view of the mountains, and a client list that would have made my pre-med professors nod with something close to approval. Dorothy's calculator sat on my desk, battery dead, screen blank. I hadn't replaced it. I told myself I didn't need it anymore. I told myself a lot of things. The UC Health contract arrived on my desk on a Monday in September, 3 weeks before everything changed. 47 pages. Claims auditing for a 12-hospital network across the Front Range. The kind of contract that turns a small firm into a real one, the kind with a retainer that had 6 figures and a duration clause that said 3 years with option to renew. Marcus brought it into my office holding it with both hands, the way you carry a cake you're afraid of dropping. "This," he said, setting it on my desk, "is worth more than most people's houses. You should celebrate." Celebrations have a terrible ROI. I'll buy lunch. That is your version of celebrating. That's the problem, Lauren. The problem is that lunch costs $12 and a party costs $300. The math isn't complicated. He sat down in the chair across from me, the one I kept for clients, but that Marcus had claimed through sheer repetition, and looked at me the way he sometimes did, like he was running a formula in his head, and the output concerned him. Your family's emotional ROI is negative, Lauren. I ran the numbers. I didn't ask you to run my numbers. Nobody asks me. I just deliver the audit. He grinned. But his eyes didn't. Marcus had learned, over 7 years of sitting in that chair, exactly how far he could push before I went quiet, and he was always careful to stop one sentence before the line. This time he was right on it. I bought lunch. Thai, from the place on Larimer. We ate in the conference room because my office didn't have a second chair that wasn't Marcus's chair, and Marcus's chair was, according to him, ergonomically calibrated to my specific suffering. The contract sat on my desk all afternoon. I should have been reviewing the scope of work, flagging the liability clauses, calculating the staffing requirements. Instead, I kept looking at the first page, the one with our company name in bold. Clark Healthcare Consulting. My name, my company. My 14-hour days and my canceled vacations and my 3 a.m. emails about coding discrepancies that no human being should care about at 3 a.m., but that I cared about because caring about the details was the only thing I'd ever been consistently good at. Everyone left by 6:30. Marcus was last. He stood in my doorway and said, "Go home, Lauren. The contract will still be worth 6 figures in the morning." I know. I'm just going to review the— You're going to sit in this office alone and pretend that's a choice instead of a habit. But sure. Review the contract. He tapped the doorframe twice, his version of goodbye, and left. The building went quiet. Not silent. Buildings in Lodo are never silent. There's always a truck or a siren or someone arguing about parking, but the inside quiet, the kind that happens when the last person leaves and the air settles into the shape of their absence. I sat at my desk, the contract in front of me, the mountain view behind me. I never faced the window when I worked, which Marcus said was a metaphor I refused to unpack for you. Dorothy's calculator to my left, next to a mug that said "Audit This" in block letters, a gift from Marcus that I pretended to hate. The calculator's screen was dark. The battery had died in 2024, and I hadn't replaced it because replacing it meant opening the back panel, and opening the back panel meant seeing the masking tape, and seeing the masking tape meant reading my grandmother's handwriting, and reading my grandmother's handwriting meant feeling something I had filed away in a drawer I didn't open. I looked around the office. Really looked, the way you look at a room when you're trying to see it through someone else's eyes. There were no photographs, not one. Marcus had a framed picture of his mother on his desk. Elena, our office manager, had 3 photos of her kids and a crayon drawing that said "Mummy is the boss." Even Terrence, our newest hire who'd been with us for 4 months, had a photo of his dog. My walls had framed certificates, a CPA license, 2 industry awards, a diploma, documents that proved I was qualified, not a single thing that proved I was known. No flowers from an opening day because there was no opening day. I'd moved in on a Saturday and started working on Sunday. No card from a parent. No letter from a sister. No note taped to a door that said "Congratulations" or "We're proud" or even just "Good luck." I had built this. Every client, every contract, every square foot of this corner office with its mountain view I never looked at. I built it the way my grandmother taught me, counting everything, trusting the math. And the math was correct. The math was always correct. But the room was empty. And for the first time in 11 years, the emptiness wasn't something I could file under efficiency or independence or focus. It was just empty. The way a house is empty when everyone has moved out and the last thing you hear is the echo of your own footsteps. I had spent 11 years winning an argument with people who weren't in the room, building a case that nobody would see, compiling evidence of my worth for a jury that had never been seated. My parents didn't know the name of my company. My mother didn't know I lived in Denver, or if she did, she'd learned it from someone else. Because I hadn't told her. because telling her would mean admitting I still wanted her to know, and admitting that would mean the math didn't add up, and the math always had to add up. I picked up the calculator, turned it over. The weight of it, light, plastic, ordinary, was the same as it had been when I was 10. I pressed a button. Nothing. Dark screen. Dead battery. A machine that used to work, sitting in a room full of proof, doing nothing. I put it down and went home. Janine Torres called me the following week. We'd met 7 years earlier at a legal aid clinic where I'd volunteered to help uninsured patients navigate billing disputes, and she'd volunteered to provide pro bono contract review. She was a fiduciary attorney, now estates, trusts, elder law, and she had the kind of voice that made you feel like everything was going to be handled, even when it wasn't. "Dinner," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm busy." "You're always busy. That's not a reason, that's a diagnosis." "Thursday, 7 o'clock, Rioja on Larimer. I'm buying." I almost said no. The word was right there, loaded and ready, because saying no was efficient, and dinner was 2 hours I could spend reviewing the UChealth scope of work, and being alone was a system I had optimized over 11 years. And I did not enjoy people interfering with optimized systems. I said yes. I don't know why. Maybe because Janine never asked twice, and people who never ask twice are usually the ones worth saying yes to. Rioja was warm and loud and smelled like roasted garlic and expensive wine. Janine was already seated, dark hair pinned up, reading, glasses on, a glass of Malbec in front of her like she'd been there for hours even though she'd arrived 3 minutes ago. She had that quality. Some people fill a room. Janine furnished it. We ordered. We talked about her caseload, about my contract, about a mutual friend who'd moved to Portland and started making pottery, which Janine found both admirable and suspicious. Normal things. The kind of conversation that costs nothing and deposits something small into an account you didn't know you had. Then she set down her glass and looked at me. "You ever talk to your family?" "There's nothing to talk about. The numbers don't add up." "You say that a lot. The numbers don't add up. Like everything is a ledger." "Everything is a ledger." She was quiet for a moment. Janine's quiet was different from most people's quiet. It wasn't empty, it was full. Full of the thing she was about to say, and the care she was taking in choosing how to say it. "You keep auditing everyone else's numbers, Lauren. When are you going to audit your own?" I blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means you've been running the same calculation for 11 years. Parents failed you, system failed you, you succeeded anyway. But you keep rerunning it. Every contract, every client, every dollar, it's all evidence in a case you're building against people who aren't paying attention." My phone buzzed. "Marcus, is this a date? If so, I need to update your employee file. HR requires disclosure." I typed back, "It's dinner, Marcus. Marcus. Dinner is just a date without the paperwork." I put the phone down. Janine was still watching me. "I'm fine," I said. "I know you're fine. Fine is your factory setting. I'm asking if you're happy." I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have an answer. Because the answer was a number I hadn't run yet, and I wasn't sure I wanted to see the total. Janine's question stayed with me for 3 weeks. "Audit your own numbers." I turned it over at my desk in my car on the floor at 5:30 a.m., doing bird dogs while my back complained in its usual dialect of stiffness and heat. I didn't know what she meant. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday in October, I found out because the numbers audited themselves. The case that changed everything was routine. A hospital in Colorado Springs had flagged a billing dispute. An elderly patient's family claimed that funds from a 529 education savings plan had been improperly liquidated to cover medical expenses. The family wanted the hospital to absorb the cost because the 529 withdrawal had triggered a tax penalty that nobody had disclosed. My job was to audit the claim chain. Straightforward. I'd handled dozens of cases involving 529 disputes. They were common in healthcare billing, especially when families got desperate and started pulling from every account they could reach. I opened the legal brief and started reading. Paragraph 4. 529 education savings plans are owned by the account holder, not the beneficiary. The account holder retains full authority to withdraw funds, change the beneficiary, or close the account at any time, subject to applicable tax penalties on non-qualified withdrawals. I stopped reading. I read it again. Owned by the account holder, not the beneficiary. My hands went still on the keyboard. Not a decision. A reflex, the way your body stops before your brain catches up, like it knows something you haven't figured out yet. Dorothy had opened two 529 plans. One for me, one for Brittany. My mother had mentioned it once, at the funeral 17 years ago. Grandma took care of everything, and I had never not once in 17 years asked what everything meant. I had never asked who owned the accounts. I had never asked what happened to them, because I was 10 when Dorothy died, and then I was 18 and broken. And then I was in Denver building a life out of numbers that belonged to other people. And it never occurred to me to count my own. I closed the hospital file. I opened a browser. I typed, Kansas State Treasurer 529 Plan Records Request. The form was simple. Account holder name, beneficiary name, social security number, relationship. I filled it out in 4 minutes, submitted it, then I sat at my desk and stared at the mountain view I never looked at and waited for 2 weeks. The envelope from the Kansas State Treasurer's office arrived on a Tuesday. White. State seal in the corner. I opened it standing at my mailbox in the lobby of my building on Wazee Street, because I couldn't wait for the elevator. Account Kansas Learning Quest 529 Plan opened. March 2005 Original account holder, Dorothy M. Clark. Successor account owner, designated upon account holder's death, Nancy R. Clark. Beneficiary, Lauren A. Clark. Balance at time of account holder's death, 2008, $63,000. Balance as of the 1st of June 2016, $68,214.77. Withdrawal, the 12th of June 2016. Full liquidation, 68,214 美元, 77. Withdrawn by Nancy R. Clark, successor owner. Current balance, $0. June 12th. 3 weeks before Brittany's wedding. 4 months after my accident. The same month my mother told me they couldn't spare a dime. My body processed it before my mind did. My jaw locked. My fingers creased the paper. A sound came out of my throat, not a word. Something lower than a word. Something from the part of you that isn't language. I turned to the second page. Brittany's account. Account. Kansas Learning Quest, 529 Plan Beneficiary, Brittany N. Clark. Balance as of the 1st of June 2016, $67,012.43. Withdrawal, the 14th of June 2016. Full liquidation. Withdrawn by Nancy R. Clark. Both accounts, 2 days apart. Total, $135,227.20. $135,227.20. The exact budget for a country club wedding, with a chocolate fountain and monogrammed napkins, and a 7-piece band, and a lavender dress, and a speech that said, "I'm so proud of my girls." My grandmother left that money for our education. She sat at her kitchen table and filled out the forms and wrote the checks and designated the beneficiaries by name, by social security number, one for each granddaughter, because she believed in math. She believed that if you set up the right accounts and trusted the numbers, the people you loved would be taken care of. She didn't account for the variable she couldn't calculate, her own daughter. I stood in the lobby for a long time. The mailbox was still open. A woman I didn't know walked past me with a stroller and gave me the kind of look you give someone who's standing too still in a public place. I didn't notice. I was doing math. $68,214.77. That was mine. Not in the abstract, not philosophically. It was designated for me by a woman who wrote "Count Everything." Trust the math inside a calculator she gave me when I was 10 years old. And my mother had taken it, all of it, and spent it on a wedding I attended in a $37 dress, with a walker and a spine that hadn't been repaired because there was, allegedly, no money. There had always been money. It had always been mine. I went upstairs. I sat at my desk. I picked up Dorothy's calculator, dead screen, dead battery, and pressed the buttons anyway. 135,227 divided by 2. Nothing happened. The screen stayed dark, but I knew the answer. I called Janine. "I found my numbers," I said. She must have heard something in my voice, the flatness of it, the precision, the way I sounded less like a person and more like an audit finding being read into the record, because she didn't ask me to elaborate. She just said, "Tell me." I told her. Account numbers, dates, amounts. The successor owner designation. The 2 withdrawals, 2 days apart, 3 weeks before a wedding, 4 months after an accident. I read it the way I read claims, clean, factual, without adjectives. Janine was quiet for 11 seconds. I counted. Breach of fiduciary duty, she said. Dorothy designated Nancy as successor owner to manage the funds for the beneficiaries, not to liquidate them for personal use. The withdrawal was technically within Nancy's authority as account owner, but the purpose of the designation was custodial to manage on behalf of the named beneficiaries. There's case law on this. It's actionable. How much can I get back? Principal plus accrued interest, potentially plus damages for breach. Depending on the judge, we could be looking at north of $100,000. I sat with that number. $100,000. Enough to reimburse 11 years. Except 11 years isn't a thing you reimburse. It's a thing you survive, and then you carry it, and then one Tuesday in October you find out the wait had a receipt the whole time. I don't want the money, I said. Janine paused. Then what do you want? I want her to know that I know. I want her to sit across from a legal document with her name on it and understand that the numbers were always there, and I found them, and they don't lie. Lauren, file it. She did. Breach of fiduciary duty. Clark versus Clark. The documents were served to Nancy and Raymond Clark at their home on Elm Ridge Drive in Overland Park, Kansas, on a Wednesday afternoon in November. If you found out the money was always yours, that your grandmother meant it for you, counted it for you, wrote your name on the dotted line, and the people you trusted took it and spent it on someone else's party, would you want the money back? Or would you want something that money can't buy? I filed the claim on a Wednesday. The universe, it turns out, had been filing its own. Marcus found out before I did. He always found out before I did, because Marcus treated social media the way I treated medical claims, as an ecosystem of data that told you everything about a person if you knew where to look. He walked into my office on a Friday afternoon in January, 3 months after I'd filed the claim, and sat in his chair without being invited. That alone told me something was off, because Marcus always knocked not out of formality, but out of a genuine belief that unannounced entries were an inefficiency in the social contract. I need to tell you something, he said, and I need you to not do math while I'm talking. I always do math. I know, that's the problem. He set his phone on my desk, screen up. A Facebook post from someone I didn't follow, a woman named Chelsea Nguyen, tagged in a photo of a going-away party at a car dealership in Lenexa, Kansas. The caption, "Congrats to Brandon and Chelsea on their next chapter, California dreaming, Brandon Holloway." My sister's husband, standing in the photo with his arm around a woman who was not my sister, grinning the way men grin when they've just swapped one life for another and called it starting over. He left, I said. Not a question. 3 weeks ago, from what I can piece together. Filed for divorce. The house is underwater, mortgage is more than it's worth. Credit card debt somewhere north of $80,000. Marcus paused. He also dropped her from his health insurance plan before the separation was finalized. Which is legal in Kansas, in case you're wondering. Legal and terrible. I sat with that information the way I sit with any dataset, sorting, categorizing, assigning values. Brandon Holloway had been married to my sister for 11 years. He had lived in a house paid for by my grandmother's education fund, eaten dinners at a table that existed because a woman named Dorothy Clark believed in planning ahead, and then he had walked out and left my sister with 2 children, $87,000 in debt, and no health insurance. My brain did the thing it always did. It calculated. Brittany's wedding, $135,000 invested. 11 years of marriage. $87,000 in debt upon exit. Net return, negative $222,000. On paper, it was the worst investment my parents had ever made. Worse than the kitchen renovation in 2009. Worse than Raymond's bass boat that sat in the driveway for 3 years before he sold it at a loss. On paper. In practice, it was the story of a woman who had been handed everything and taught to need nothing else. And when the everything walked out the door with a sales associate named Chelsea, there was nothing underneath. Brittany moved back into my parents' house on Elm Ridge Drive with her 2 children, a 7-year-old named Madison and a 4-year-old named Carter. I learned this from Marcus, who learned it from Facebook, who learned it from the algorithmic certainty that people in crisis post more than people at peace. Brittany posted a photo of the kids' bedroom at my parents' house, the room that used to be mine, with the caption, "Starting fresh. Grateful for family." Starting fresh in the room where I once taped my college acceptance letter to the wall. I didn't comment. I didn't react. I filed it. 2 months later, Marcus walked in again. Same chair. Same expression, the one he wore when the data was bad, and he needed to deliver it carefully. Brittany has a back problem. I looked up. L4, L5. Herniated disc. Chronic, apparently been building for years, but now it's acute. Doctor says she needs surgery. Le quatre L5. The same vertebrae. The same disc. The same location in the spine where a drunk driver in a Chevy Silverado had rearranged my future 11 years ago. The math on that coincidence was not something I wanted to calculate, because some numbers don't tell you anything useful, they just stare at you. She doesn't have insurance, I said. She does not. Out of pocket for a spinal fusion is $50,000 to $80,000. You would know. I would know. I knew exactly what it cost, what the facility fee would be, what the anesthesiologist would charge, what the physical therapy sessions would run per visit, and how many visits she'd need. I knew because I had lived inside those numbers. I had been the patient in the system I now audited, and the system had the same answer for Brittany that it had had for me. Your request has been reviewed. Is she applying for Medicaid? I asked. I don't know. I don't think she knows how. Of course she didn't. Brittany had never navigated a system in her life. She had never needed to. Systems had been navigated for her by Nancy, by Brandon, by the $135,000 safety net that someone else's grandmother had woven and someone else's mother had spent. I found out the rest later, in pieces, some from Brittany herself, some from Raymond's letter, some from the kind of secondhand knowledge that travels through small towns in Kansas the way weather does, slow and inevitable and impossible to avoid. My mother sat in the living room of the house on Elm Ridge Drive and looked at a problem she could not solve with a checkbook or a smile. Brittany needed surgery. The surgery cost more than they had. Raymond's retirement account had already taken a hit from my legal claim. Their attorney had advised them to set aside funds for a potential settlement, which meant the savings that might have covered Brittany's procedure were frozen in a holding pattern of their own making. Nancy went through the house like a woman doing inventory on a sinking ship. She sold the dining room set, the one Dorothy had left them, for $1,200. She sold Raymond's base boat, which he'd somehow reacquired, for $900. She held a garage sale in the driveway on a Saturday in March and priced everything with the desperation of someone who had never had to assign a dollar value to her own possessions. The chocolate fountain sold for $15. I know this because Marcus sent me the garage sale listing with the caption, $9,000 original, $15 resale. That's a 99.8% depreciation. I'm not saying it's a metaphor, but I'm not saying it. I stared at that text for a long time. $9,000 for a chocolate fountain at a wedding paid for with stolen education money. $15 on a folding table in a driveway in Overland Park. There was an equation in there somewhere, but it wasn't the kind my grandmother would have put on a calculator. It was the kind you carry in your chest where the numbers don't resolve and the decimal keeps running. Nancy, I was told, sat in the kitchen after the garage sale, the same kitchen where Dorothy had taught me to count, and looked at a photograph on the refrigerator. It was old, slightly curled at the edges. Me, 10 years old, sitting on Dorothy's lap, holding the calculator, grinning at something I can't remember. My mother looked at that photograph for a long time. I know because Raymond mentioned it in his letter, the only detail he offered about her that wasn't an excuse. I don't know what she thought. I don't know if she heard Dorothy's voice, or mine, or her own. I know what she did next. She picked up the phone. Her logic, I imagine, was the same logic it had always been. Lauren has money. Lauren has a practice. Lauren is strong. Lauren will understand. Lauren will help, because Lauren always manages. She was half right. I had money. I had a practice. I was strong. But I was done managing for people who had never managed to show up for me. My mother called on a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because I bill by the hour, and I logged everything that day: the call, the conversation, the silence afterward. Some habits save your sanity. Some just make the invoice longer. Lauren, please. My mother's voice came through the phone the way water comes through a crack in a ceiling, uncontrolled, finding every gap. She was crying. Not the kind of crying she did at Brittany's wedding, which was performance crying, the kind with pauses for breath and an awareness of the audience. This was different. This was the sound of a woman whose scaffolding had collapsed. Your sister needs surgery. Her back, it's her L4. L5, the doctor says she can barely walk some days. She has no insurance. Brandon left her with nothing. The house is gone. The savings are, we don't have it, Lauren. We don't have it. I was sitting in my office on Wazy Street. The mountains were doing what they always did behind my window, standing there. Indifferent. Enormous. Dorothy's calculator sat on my desk. Dead screen. Dead battery. I hadn't touched it in weeks, but it was there. The way certain objects are always there when the moment arrives that they were built for. "Please," my mother said. "You're the only one who can help." I counted. Not on purpose. My brain just did it the way it always did, when the numbers were the only thing between me and whatever was underneath. 4,015 days since I lay on the floor of a studio apartment in Overland Park with a spine that was crumbling and called this same woman on this same kind of Tuesday and heard her say the word that became the architecture of my entire life. Mom. Yes, honey? She'll manage. 3 words. The same 3 words, in the same order, with the same flat certainty. I didn't plan to say them. I didn't rehearse them in the mirror or write them on a note card. They came out the way a key fits a lock. It was cut for clean, precise, inevitable. Silence. Not the kind of silence that means someone is thinking. The kind that means someone has stopped. What? She'll manage. That's what you told me. June 2016. I was 18 years old with a fractured spine, and you told me I'd manage because you couldn't spare a dime. So she'll manage. Lauren, that is not the same. It's the same vertebrae, Mom. L4, L5. The same disc. The same surgery. The only difference is that I was 18 and alone, and she's 31 and living in your house. So she has a head start. My mother's breathing changed. Faster. The sound of someone recalculating. But I'm not calling just to say that, I said. There's something else. What? I know about the 529 plans. The silence that followed was a different species entirely. The first silence was shock. This one was fear. I could hear it the way you can hear a building settle when the foundation shifts. A sound that isn't loud but changes the weight of everything above it. I don't know what your... Dorothy left 2 529 education savings plans. One for me. One for Brittany. You were designated as successor owner when she died. You withdrew both accounts in June 2016, $68,214.77 from mine, $67,012.43 from Brittany's. Total, $135,227.20. 3 weeks before the wedding. 4 months after my accident, I read the numbers the way I read audit findings to hospital boards, clean, sourced, inarguable. Because that's what this was, an audit. The final audit of a ledger that had been out of balance for 11 years, performed by the only person in the family who knew how to read one. Those funds were for the family, Nancy said. Her voice had changed again, tighter now, the scaffolding trying to rebuild itself mid-collapse. I had the right to make decisions about you had custodial authority. Dorothy designated you to manage the funds for the beneficiaries. That's me and Brittany, not you, not a wedding, not a chocolate fountain. Brittany needed that wedding. She didn't have a career, she needed stability, she needed a future, she needed $135,000 worth of future, and I needed 0. You were strong, Lauren, you were always strong, you didn't need. And then it came. The thing underneath all the other things, the sentence my mother had been carrying for 11 years, wrapped in justifications and checkbooks, and the lavender dress she wore to a wedding, paid for with her dead mother's money. You never needed me. Her voice broke on the word me. Not performed, not controlled. Broken the way glass breaks, sudden, complete, irreversible. Not once. Brittany called me every day. Brittany needed my advice, my help, she needed me. And you just managed. You always just managed. Do you know what that's like? To have a daughter who doesn't need you? To watch her leave and not even look back? The office was very quiet. The mountains didn't move. The calculator sat on the desk with its dead screen and its masking tape message and its 17 years of silence. I heard my mother. I heard her the way you hear a claim that's been denied for the wrong reason. The denial is wrong, but the pain behind the filing is real. Nancy Clark had stolen from her daughter not because she didn't love her, but because she loved being needed more than she loved being fair. Brittany was the investment that paid dividends in phone calls and visits, and Mama, what should I do? I was the asset that appreciated silently, requiring no management, generating no contact. I understood it. Understanding is not the same as forgiving. A claim can be valid and still be denied. I needed you once, Mom. My voice was level. The voice I used in boardrooms when the numbers were bad and the room was hostile and the only thing between me and chaos was precision. June 2016. I was lying on a floor with a spine that was falling apart, and I called you and you said no. Not because you didn't have the money, because you had already decided where the money was going. You made a choice. You chose a chocolate fountain over my vertebrae. And that's fine. People make choices, but you don't get to make that choice and then call me 11 years later and ask me to make a different one. You're suing your own mother. It came out as a whisper. I'm auditing the books. That's what I do. Grandma taught me. Count everything. Trust the math. The line was quiet for a long time. I didn't fill it. Silence, in a confrontation, belongs to the person who isn't afraid of it. Your grandmother, Nancy said finally, would be ashamed of you. No, I said. She'd check my numbers. And they'd be right. I hung up. The office was still. The contract on my desk, UC Health, 6 figures, 3 years, sat where it had sat all day, patient and indifferent. The mug that said audit this had gone cold. The mountains were turning pink in the last of the sun. And I watched them for the first time in months, because for the first time in months I had nothing to calculate. I picked up Dorothy's calculator, turned it over, slid the battery cover open. The masking tape was still there, slightly yellowed, the handwriting still legible. For my Lauren, count everything, trust the math. I drove to Walgreens, bought 2 AAA batteries, $1.99. I put them in the calculator in the parking lot, under a streetlight, and pressed the power button. The screen lit up, green numbers on a gray background. Blinking, ready. Some things, it turns out, just need new batteries. The settlement came in February. Janine called it Clean Nancy, and Raymond's attorney had advised them to avoid trial, and they'd agreed to return $78,000, representing the principal plus accrued interest on my 529 account. As part of the agreement, both parents signed a written acknowledgement that the funds had been Dorothy's education trust, designated for the named beneficiaries, and that the withdrawal had been inconsistent with the custodial purpose of the account. Nancy signed at her attorney's office. Raymond signed separately, at a different time, at a different table. Janine told me that detail without commentary. I didn't need commentary. 2 people who had shared a kitchen table for 33 years couldn't share a table to sign a document. The math on that marriage was its own audit. The check arrived by certified mail. $78,000. I held it at my desk and looked at the number and waited for something proportional: triumph, relief, closure, any of the words people use when a ledger finally balances. What came was smaller and quieter than any of those words. It was the feeling of picking up something that had always been yours from a lost and found counter. Not joy. Recognition. Brittany called 2 weeks later. I picked up on the first ring, because I remembered what it was like to call someone and not be answered. I didn't know, Lauren. About the 529. I didn't know the money was yours. I believe you. Mom told me it was their savings. I swear I didn't. I know. I've seen enough fraud cases to tell the difference between a conspirator and a bystander. You were a bystander, Brittany. She was quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't empty but isn't ready either. The quiet of someone standing at the edge of a sentence they haven't built yet. What do I owe you? She asked. Nothing. Then why does it feel like everything? I didn't answer that. Some questions aren't yours to resolve for other people. But I did something else. I sent her a package, not money, not a check, not a wire transfer. A manila envelope containing 3 things. A list of physical therapy clinics in the Kansas City area that accepted Medicaid, a step-by-step guide to the Medicaid application process that I'd written myself on a Sunday afternoon, and the contact information for a patient advocate at KU Medical Center who specialized in helping uninsured patients navigate the system. I included a note, handwritten on a plain index card. This is how I managed. It's how you can too. The system is complicated, but it works if you know where to look. I gave her the one thing nobody gave me. A map. Raymond's letter arrived 3 weeks after the settlement. Handwritten. His penmanship had gotten worse, shaky, slanted, the letters pressing too hard in some places and barely touching in others, like a man who couldn't decide how much weight to put on what he was saying. Lauren, I should have said this 11 years ago. I should have said it on the phone that night. Your mother was wrong. I was wrong for letting her be wrong. Dorothy would not forgive me, and I don't expect you to either. But I want you to know that I kept every article about your company. Every one. I have a folder in my desk drawer. Your mother doesn't know. I'm not telling you this so you'll forgive me. I'm telling you because you deserve to know that someone was counting. Someone was counting. My father, who never said anything at the dinner table, who looked at me at the wedding and looked away, who called me at 2 in the morning and spoke one sentence and hung up. He had been keeping a file, a quiet, hidden, insufficient file. It wasn't enough. It wasn't close to enough. But it was a number in a column I thought was empty, and the auditor in me couldn't ignore it. I put the letter in my desk drawer, next to Dorothy's calculator. Two objects from two people who loved me in different amounts and expressed it in the same language silence. 3 months later, I used the $78,000 to establish the Dorothy Clark Education Fund, a scholarship for first-generation college students from families with financial hardship. The money went back into education, the way my grandmother intended, the way the numbers were always supposed to run. Marcus, when I told him, shook his head. You just turned your trauma into a tax deduction. That is the most Lauren Clark thing I've ever seen. I laughed. I actually laughed, not the kind I performed at dinner meetings or produced when Marcus said something statistically funny, but the kind that comes from somewhere underneath the spreadsheets, somewhere I hadn't audited in a long time. My office looks different now. There's a photo on the wall, me and Janine at the restaurant where she told me to audit my own numbers. There's a framed printout of Marcus's first employee review, which he gave himself a 10 out of 10 and wrote in the comments, "No notes." There's a crayon drawing from Madison Brittany's daughter, my niece, that says Aunt Lauren in purple, the spelling wrong but the intention right. Dorothy's calculator sits on my desk. New batteries, screen glowing, masking tape intact, count everything, trust the math. My grandmother taught me that numbers don't lie. She was right. But she missed one thing: numbers don't heal either. People do. The ones who show up not because the math works out, but because they choose to. My mother chose a chocolate fountain. My father chose silence. My sister chose not to ask questions. I chose Denver. I chose Janine. I chose Marcus and his terrible spreadsheet metaphors. I chose a calculator with a dead battery and a grandmother who believed that love is math. And if you're listening to this wondering whether you should keep managing alone or finally let someone in, let me save you 11 years of invoices. Let someone in? Just make sure they're worth the investment.
Thank you for being part of Lyra Echo Stories. If this story stayed with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because every echo never truly fades.